Did you enjoy selling my house, Rebecca? I asked quietly at the dinner table. The fork froze halfway to her mouth. For a second, no one spoke. My son Daniel looked up from his plate, confused, his brow slowly creasing. Rebecca blinked, forcing a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm sorry, Margaret. What are you talking about? She said lightly. I studied her face across the table. The same careful makeup, the same practiced charm she always wore when she wanted to look innocent. The chandelier above us cast a soft yellow light over the dining room I had lived in for 36 years. The same room where my late husband, Thomas, and I had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet Sunday dinners just like this one. The same house Rebecca had tried to steal from me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I simply smiled and took a slow sip of water. 2 days earlier, I had discovered that my house, my home, had legally been transferred into Rebecca Collins's name. According to the county records, the paperwork had been filed 3 weeks ago. According to the documents, I had personally signed every page. The signature looked like mine. Neat. Familiar. Practiced. But I had never signed those papers. Not once. I found out on a quiet Tuesday morning while sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and the morning sunlight stretching across the hardwood floor. At 68, I have a routine I rarely break. Coffee at 7. The newspaper at 7:15. A slow walk around the garden if the weather allows. That morning had started the same as every other morning since Thomas passed away 4 years ago. Quiet. Predictable. Peaceful. Until the phone rang. I remember staring at it for a moment before answering. Most calls these days are either telemarketers or appointment reminders from the pharmacy. But the name on the screen made me pause. Michael Turner. I hadn't spoken to Michael in nearly a year. He had been my husband's attorney for more than 2 decades. Margaret, he said after I answered, his voice calm but unusually careful. I need to ask you something important. I set my coffee down slowly. All right, I said. What's going on? There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Papers rustled. Did you recently transfer ownership of your home? He asked. The question sounded so strange that I almost laughed. Of course not, I said. Why would I do that? Another pause. Longer this time. Margaret, Michael said, according to the county property records, the house on Willow Creek Drive was transferred to Rebecca Collins 3 weeks ago. I remember staring at the kitchen wall as his words settled in. The clock above the refrigerator ticked quietly. Outside, a lawn mower hummed somewhere down the street. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes earlier, and yet something in my world had shifted slightly out of place. That's impossible, I said finally. I never signed anything like that. Michael cleared his throat. There are documents with your signature on them. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked to the dining room window and looked out at the backyard Thomas had planted himself. The maple tree was beginning to turn gold in the early fall sunlight. 36 years. That's how long we had lived in this house. We bought it when Daniel was 5 years old. Back then it was a small, slightly run-down place with creaky stairs and faded siding. Thomas fixed every inch of it with his own hands. I painted the kitchen cabinets myself one summer while Daniel rode his bicycle up and down the driveway. Every memory of our life together lived inside those walls. And now someone had filed papers claiming it wasn't mine anymore. Margaret, Michael said gently. I realized I had been silent too long. Send me the documents, I said. I want to see them. An hour later, the email arrived. I opened the attachment slowly. The paperwork looked official. Notary stamps, legal language, filing numbers from the county office. And at the bottom of each page was a signature that looked exactly like mine. Same looping M in Margaret. Same steady line through Collins. Anyone glancing at it would believe I had signed it myself. I leaned back in my chair and studied the page for a long time. I didn't feel angry. Not at first. What I felt was something colder. Something quieter. Because I knew exactly who had done it. Rebecca had been asking me to sign little things for months. Insurance forms. Tax confirmations. Just routine paperwork. She always said with that cheerful voice of hers. I had trusted her. After all, she was family. My son's wife. The mother of my granddaughter. But as I sat there looking at those documents, the small moments from the past year began lining up in my mind like puzzle pieces finally clicking together. The casual questions about the house. The curiosity about the mortgage, even though it had been paid off for years. The day she asked how property transfers worked after someone passed away. At the time, I thought she was simply making conversation. Now the picture was suddenly very clear. Rebecca hadn't just forged my signature. She had planned this carefully, methodically, and she believed she had succeeded. I closed the document and folded my hands on the table. Outside, a breeze rustled through the maple leaves. I remember smiling then, not because it was funny, but because Rebecca had made one very serious mistake. She thought I was an old woman who wouldn't notice. She thought I would panic, or cry, or quietly accept what had happened. She had no idea who she was dealing with. And that is how the quietest war in my family began. I did not sleep much that night after speaking with Michael. Not because I felt frightened, and not because I felt helpless. What kept me awake was the quiet realization that someone inside my own family had spent months planning to take something that was never theirs. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. The same fan Thomas had installed himself during one of our many weekend renovation projects years ago. He used to joke that this house would probably outlive both of us. I remember smiling at the thought back then. Now I understood what he meant. A house is not just wood and nails. It is years. It is memories. It is quiet mornings and loud holiday dinners. It is the sound of your child running down the hallway when he is late for school. It is the place where you build a life piece by piece. That was what Rebecca believed she had taken from me with a few pieces of paper and a forged signature. The next morning I woke up before sunrise, something I had done almost every day since Thomas passed away. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock in the kitchen. I made coffee and carried the mug to the dining table where the printed documents from Michael were still sitting in a neat stack. I looked at the signature again. It really was convincing. Whoever had practiced writing it had taken their time. But the longer I studied the page, the clearer the small differences became. The line of the last letter curved slightly higher than I normally wrote it. The spacing between my first and last name was just a little too wide. Tiny details most people would never notice. But I noticed them. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back inside the envelope Michael had sent. Then I picked up my phone and called him again. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Margaret," he said. His voice sounded like he had already been working for hours. I imagine attorneys spend their mornings dealing with other people's problems long before the rest of us finish our coffee. I have been looking at the documents, I told him. I am certain that signature is not mine. I expected him to agree immediately, but instead he spoke slowly and carefully. "I believe you, Margaret. But legally speaking, we have to prove it." That word prove hung in the air for a moment. I knew he was right. Feeling certain about something and proving it in a courthouse are two very different things. "What happens next?" I asked. Michael paused again, the way lawyers often do when choosing words that matter. "For now, we do nothing," he said. "Nothing," I repeated. That surprised me. "Yes," he said calmly. "Whoever filed these documents believes the transfer is complete. That means they feel safe. People who feel safe tend to make mistakes." I leaned back in my chair and looked around the kitchen. Sunlight had started creeping across the countertop, lighting up the old ceramic bowl Thomas and I bought during a road trip through Arizona years ago. Michael continued speaking. "If we challenge this immediately, the person responsible may try to hide evidence or change their story. But if we wait and watch, they may reveal more than they intended." I understood his strategy immediately. Let the person believe the plan worked. Let them grow comfortable. Let them show their hand. I took a slow sip of coffee. "Do you think Rebecca is planning something else?" I asked quietly. Michael did not hesitate this time. "I would be very surprised if she was not. The paperwork transferring ownership is only the first step. People usually do that when they plan to sell a property or use it for financial leverage." The words settle in my mind like a puzzle piece sliding into place. Sell the house. Of course. That explained the questions she had been asking recently. Casual comments about real estate prices in the neighborhood. Curious little remarks about how valuable homes had become in our area. At the time, I thought she was simply making conversation. Now every sentence sounded different in my memory. I thanked Michael and ended the call, then sat quietly for several minutes thinking about the next move. Panic would not help. Anger would not help either. What I needed was patience. Something Thomas always said I had more of than anyone he knew. Later that afternoon, Rebecca called me. Her voice sounded cheerful, almost overly friendly. "Hi, Margaret," she said. "I was just checking in to see how you were doing." "I am doing just fine," I replied. "Thank you for asking." She asked if I needed groceries. She asked if I wanted Daniel to stop by later in the week. She spoke with the warm politeness she always used when she wanted something to sound normal. I listened carefully to every word. At the end of the call, she added one more sentence in a casual tone. By the way, she said, I have been talking to a friend who works in real estate. She says houses in your area are selling incredibly fast right now. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca believed the house already belonged to her, and she was preparing for the next step. The following days moved forward with a quiet rhythm that almost felt ordinary. That was the strange part about secrets. The world continues to look completely normal, even while something dishonest is unfolding underneath it. On Thursday morning, I woke before sunrise again and walked through the house with my coffee cup in my hand, the same way I had done thousands of times before. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath my steps, a familiar sound that had been part of my mornings for more than 3 decades. I paused beside the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where the maple tree was beginning to shed a few early leaves. Thomas always said autumn was the most honest season because nothing pretended to stay the same. I suppose he was right about that. After breakfast, I called Michael again, not because I was uncertain about the situation, but because I wanted to understand how far Rebecca might be willing to go. He answered quickly, as if he had been expecting my call. Good morning, Margaret, he said. How are you holding up today? I am doing just fine, I told him. In fact, I think Rebecca is beginning the next step of her plan. I explained the conversation we had the day before and the suggestion she made about me moving into a smaller place. Michael listened carefully without interrupting. When I finished speaking, he let out a quiet breath. That is exactly what I suspected, he said. If she believes the house belongs to her now, the logical next step is to encourage you to leave voluntarily. That would make everything much easier for her. The words sounded calm, but the meaning behind them was very clear. Rebecca was not just interested in the property. She wanted control over the entire situation. If I moved out willingly, there would be no questions, no suspicion, just an elderly woman choosing to relocate. What should I do next? I asked. Michael paused for a moment before answering. For now, you continue living your life exactly as you have been. Let her believe you are considering the idea. Meanwhile, I will gather the evidence we need to challenge the documents properly. I thanked him and ended the call, then walked slowly through the living room. The morning sunlight had reached the photographs on the wall. One picture showed Thomas standing beside the unfinished porch the summer we moved into this house. Another showed Daniel holding a baseball glove almost as large as his head. Those memories felt steady and solid in a way that no forged signature could ever replace. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a short drive around the neighborhood. The weather was clear and cool, the kind of day when people tend to work in their yards or wash their cars in the driveway. As I passed the corner near Willow Creek Park, I noticed something that made me slow down. A small real estate sign was leaning against the fence outside a neighboring property. It was not placed in the ground yet. It was simply resting there, as if someone planned to install it soon. I continued driving, but the image stayed in my mind. That silver sedan I saw earlier in the week returned to my thoughts as well. When I arrived back home, the street looked quiet again. The unfamiliar car was gone. The only vehicle in the driveway across from mine belonged to Mr. Harrison, who had lived there longer than I had. Everything looked calm, but appearances can be misleading. That evening, Daniel called me. My son does not usually call during the middle of the week unless Rebecca reminds him. His voice sounded relaxed, unaware that anything unusual was happening. Hi, Mom, he said. Rebecca mentioned you might be thinking about moving somewhere smaller. Are you really considering that? I sat down at the kitchen table before answering. Well, I said slowly, it is something Rebecca suggested. Daniel did not respond immediately. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background on his end of the line. That might not be a bad idea, he said eventually. A big house can be a lot of work. His tone was not unkind. It was simply practical. I realized in that moment how little he knew about what was really happening. Rebecca had been careful to keep him comfortable and uninvolved. I told him I would think about it, and we ended the conversation politely. After the call, I remained at the table for several minutes, tracing my finger along the edge of the envelope that contained the forged documents. Rebecca believed she was guiding the story toward its ending. She believed I was slowly accepting her suggestion. But the truth was something very different. Every phone call she made and every conversation she started was quietly adding to the record Michael was building. And the more confident she became, the more clearly her intentions would reveal themselves. The following weekend arrived with the same quiet routine that had filled this house for years, but now every small detail seemed sharper to me, as if I were watching my own life from a careful distance. On Saturday morning, I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table while soft light moved across the wooden floorboards Thomas had installed with his own hands more than 3 decades earlier. I held the warm mug in both hands and looked out the window toward the driveway, where the maple tree cast long shadows across the concrete. The neighborhood looked calm. A man 2 houses down was washing his truck. Someone's dog barked briefly and then fell silent. It was the kind of ordinary morning people never notice until something important interrupts it. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. The name on the screen was Rebecca. Her timing had become predictable. She called just often enough to appear caring, but always with a purpose hiding beneath the conversation. I answered calmly. "Good morning, Rebecca," I said. Her voice sounded bright, almost cheerful. "Margaret, I was thinking about our conversation earlier this week," she said. "Have you given any more thought to the idea of moving somewhere smaller?" I let a small pause settle into the line before answering. "I have been thinking about it," I said slowly. "The house is certainly large for just one person." I could almost hear the quiet satisfaction behind her breathing. "Yes, exactly," she said quickly. "That is what I have been saying. There are some wonderful communities nearby, very comfortable and easy to maintain. Some even have walking paths and social activities." She spoke like someone describing a vacation resort, instead of suggesting that I leave the home where I had lived most of my adult life. I thanked her politely and told her I would continue considering it. She sounded pleased when we ended the call. When I set the phone down, I noticed something through the kitchen window that made me pause. A car had pulled up slowly along the curb in front of my house. It was the same silver sedan I had seen earlier in the week. This time the driver stepped out. He wore a navy blazer and carried a leather folder under one arm. I watched him walk halfway up the sidewalk before he stopped and looked at the house carefully, studying the roofline, the porch, the windows. He even took out his phone and snapped a photograph. Then he returned to his car and drove away without knocking on the door. I waited a few minutes before calling Michael. I explained what I had just seen. His response came quickly and calmly. "That sounds like someone conducting a preliminary property review," he said. "Real estate agents often do that before listing a home for sale." My suspicion had been correct. Rebecca was already moving forward with the next step of her plan. She believed the house was hers and that I would soon leave willingly. The idea almost made me smile. Later that afternoon, I decided to drive past the small real estate office near the center of town. The building sat beside a coffee shop and a bookstore that had been there for years. As I slowed my car in front of the window, I noticed a familiar silver sedan parked in the lot. The same one I had seen outside my house earlier that morning. Through the glass, I could see the driver sitting at a desk speaking with a woman behind the counter. Papers were spread across the table between them. I did not need to hear the conversation to understand what was happening. Rebecca had already begun contacting people who could help her sell the property. The confidence behind that decision told me she believed the forged documents were completely secure. That confidence was exactly what Michael had predicted. When I returned home, the house felt peaceful in a way that was almost comforting. I walked slowly through each room, pausing to notice the details I had known for years but rarely stopped to appreciate. The faded mark on the wall where Daniel once bounced a basketball indoors when he was 13. The small dent in the hallway doorframe where Thomas accidentally dropped a ladder during one of his weekend repairs. Every inch of this place carried the quiet evidence of a life built over time. No signature on a piece of paper could erase that. That evening, Michael called again with new information. "Margaret, I spoke with a property records specialist today," he said. "The filing Rebecca submitted contains a notarized verification that claims you signed the transfer document in person." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. That meant someone had formally witnessed the signature. Either that person had been misled or they had been careless. Michael continued speaking. "If we prove the signature was forged, the entire transfer becomes legally invalid. But the stronger our evidence is, the clearer the outcome will be." I understood exactly what he meant. Rebecca was creating a trail of paperwork and decisions that would eventually expose the truth. The more steps she took, the harder it would be for her to explain them later. After the call ended, I walked to the front porch and sat down in the old wooden chair Thomas had built years ago. The evening air felt cool and steady. Across the street, the porch lights began turning on one by one as the sun faded behind the trees. Somewhere down the block, a car door slammed and laughter drifted through the quiet neighborhood. Life continued moving forward exactly as it always had. Rebecca believed she was approaching the end of her plan, but the truth was something very different. Every move she made was slowly guiding the story toward a moment she did not see coming. Monday morning arrived quietly, carrying the same calm rhythm the house had known for decades, but now every moment felt like a step towards something inevitable. I woke before sunrise again and walked into the kitchen where the air still held the faint scent of basil from the garden. The clock above the refrigerator read 6:15. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the table where the envelope from Michael still rested beneath a small stack of mail. For a moment, I simply watched the light slowly spread across the room. This house had always been peaceful in the mornings. Even when Daniel was a child rushing through the hallway before school, the early hours felt steady and calm. I took a sip of coffee and opened the envelope again, reading the documents one more time. The forged signature stared back at me with quiet confidence. Whoever had practiced it had done so carefully, but imitation is never perfect. The longer I looked, the more the differences revealed themselves. The angle of the letters was slightly sharper. The rhythm of the pen strokes lacked the small pauses I always made when writing my name. Details most people would never see, but the people who mattered would see them. Around 9 o'clock the phone rang. It was Michael. His voice sounded focused but calm, the way it always did when he had something important to say. "Margaret, I have an update," he said. I listened quietly while he explained what he had discovered over the weekend. The real estate office I mentioned earlier had already begun preparing listing materials for the property. The agent who visited your house is named Brian Keller. According to his records, he was contacted by Rebecca 2 weeks ago to begin evaluating the home for a possible sale. I leaned back in my chair and looked toward the window where sunlight had begun touching the maple tree outside. 2 weeks ago meant she had started preparing the sale even before the property transfer was officially recorded. That kind of confidence only comes from believing the plan will succeed. Michael continued speaking. I also confirmed that the notary who verified the document works at a small office downtown. His name is listed on the paperwork. That information mattered more than anything else he had said. A notarized document carries legal weight because someone claims to have witnessed the signature being made. If that claim is false, the entire foundation of the transfer begins to collapse. I asked Michael one question. "Do you believe he actually saw me sign those papers?" There was a short pause before he answered. "I cannot say yet, but I will find out." After the call ended, I remained at the table for several minutes thinking about what Rebecca must believe at this point. From her perspective, everything was moving forward smoothly. The paperwork had been filed. A real estate agent had inspected the property. She had even begun encouraging me to move somewhere smaller. Every step probably felt like progress to her. That confidence was the very thing Michael had predicted would expose the truth. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by the house unexpectedly. I heard his truck pull into the driveway and saw him walking toward the porch through the living room window. When I opened the door, he smiled the same way he always had, a little tired from work, but still carrying the easy warmth he had as a child. "Hi, Mom," he said. "I was nearby and thought I would check on you." I invited him inside, and we sat at the kitchen table. For a few minutes, we spoke about ordinary things. His work schedule, the weather changing toward fall, my small garden in the backyard. Eventually, the conversation turned to the subject Rebecca had planted in his mind. "She mentioned you might be thinking about moving," he said carefully. I gave a small nod. "She suggested it might make life easier," I replied. Daniel rested his arms on the table and looked around the room slowly. "I think she just wants what is best for you," he said. His voice held no suspicion, no concern, only the quiet assumption that his wife was being thoughtful. I studied his face for a moment and realized something important. Rebecca had not told him anything about the property transfer. If she had, he would not be speaking this way. That meant she was keeping the entire situation hidden from him. When Daniel left later that afternoon, I walked through the house once more, pausing in each room the same way I had done before. The living room felt warm in the late sunlight. The hallway photographs looked unchanged. The house stood exactly as it always had, calm and steady. But now the pieces of the story were moving closer together. Rebecca believed she was approaching the final step of her plan. The real estate agent would soon be ready to list the property. She would continue encouraging me to leave. And when the moment came, she would expect everything to fall neatly into place. What she did not understand was that Michael and I were already preparing for that moment. Because once someone believes the game is finished, that is when the truth has the clearest chance to appear. The following evening, Rebecca called again, but this time her voice carried a different tone. It sounded lighter, almost excited, as if she believed something important was finally falling into place. "Margaret, I was thinking," she said after greeting me, "maybe we should have dinner together this week. Just the three of us. You, Daniel, and me. It has been a while since we all sat down together." I paused for a moment before answering. "That sounds nice," I said calmly. She suggested Thursday evening, and I agreed without hesitation. When the call ended, I understood immediately why she wanted that dinner. Rebecca was preparing the moment when she would gently guide the conversation toward the house again. Perhaps she believed that if Daniel was present, I would feel more comfortable agreeing to move. Or perhaps she thought it would make her plan look more reasonable if it appeared to be a family decision. Either way, it meant something important. She believed the situation was under control. The next morning, I spoke with Michael again and explained Rebecca's invitation. He listened carefully before responding. "That could actually work in our favor," he said. "If she feels confident enough to discuss the house openly in front of Daniel, she may reveal more than she intends." His words made sense. Confidence often encourages people to speak more freely than they should. The rest of the week passed slowly but peacefully. I continued my routines exactly as before. Morning coffee, time in the garden, short drives to the grocery store or the post office. Anyone watching my life from the outside would see nothing unusual at all. But inside the quiet structure of those days, something important was happening. Michael had begun arranging a formal handwriting analysis of the documents Rebecca submitted. The specialist he contacted had worked on legal cases for more than 20 years. According to Michael, the differences between my real signature and the forged one would become very clear under professional examination. Meanwhile, the real estate agent Brian Keller had already prepared preliminary listing materials for the house. Michael confirmed that information through public records and local contacts. Rebecca was moving forward quickly, much faster than someone who expected resistance. That alone told us how certain she felt about the success of her plan. Thursday evening arrived with cool autumn air and a sky that turned soft orange behind the trees. I spent the afternoon preparing a simple dinner the way I always did when family visited. Roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, fresh bread from the bakery. The same kind of meal Daniel had grown up eating at this very table. By 6:30, the house smelled warm and welcoming. At exactly 6:45, Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway. Rebecca stepped out of the passenger seat beside him. She wore a bright smile when she walked through the front door, the same polite expression she had perfected over the years. "Margaret, it smells wonderful in here," she said cheerfully. I thanked her and led them into the dining room. For the first half hour, the conversation remained comfortably ordinary. Daniel talked about a project at work. Rebecca described a new store that had opened near their neighborhood. I listened quietly and passed the dishes across the table. The atmosphere almost felt normal enough to forget what was really happening beneath the surface. Then Rebecca gently guided the conversation toward the subject she had clearly planned. "Margaret," she began, setting her fork down carefully, "I have been thinking more about what we discussed earlier this week, about the possibility of you moving somewhere that requires less maintenance." Daniel looked up with mild curiosity. Rebecca continued speaking in a calm and helpful tone. "This house is beautiful, but it is very large for one person. There are so many wonderful communities designed for people who want a quieter lifestyle. Places with gardens and walking paths and friendly neighbors." I watched her carefully while she spoke. Her confidence was easy to see now. She believed the house already belonged to her, and that tonight's conversation was simply the final step before I agreed to leave it behind. Daniel nodded slightly as he listened, clearly assuming his wife was offering thoughtful advice. I folded my hands on the table and allowed a small moment of silence to settle over the room before answering. "I have been thinking about that idea," I said slowly. Rebecca's smile widened almost immediately. "Really?" she said. "Yes," I replied calmly. "In fact, I have been thinking about the house quite a lot lately." For a brief second, her eyes brightened with quiet satisfaction. But what she did not realize was that every word spoken during this dinner was quietly guiding the conversation towards something she had not prepared for. I let Rebecca's words settle into the quiet air of the dining room for a moment before I spoke again. Daniel looked between the two of us, unaware that the conversation was balancing on the edge of something far more serious than a simple discussion about living arrangements. The soft light above the table reflected off the polished wood that Thomas had refinished himself years ago, and for a brief moment I remembered how many ordinary dinners had taken place here. Rebecca sat across from me with a patient smile, confident and relaxed, as if she believed the outcome of this evening was already decided. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate before continuing. "You are right about one thing, Rebecca," I said calmly. "This house is large. It has always been large. Even when Daniel was a child running through the hallways and filling every room with noise, it still felt big sometimes." Daniel smiled faintly at that memory, but Rebecca leaned forward slightly, listening closely. I continued speaking in the same steady tone. "When Thomas and I bought this place, Daniel was only 5 years old. The walls needed paint. The roof leaked during the first winter. But your father and I fixed everything ourselves." Daniel nodded again, remembering those years. I saw Rebecca glance briefly toward him before returning her attention to me. "The house has been part of our family for a long time," I said quietly. "That is why I have been thinking about it so carefully these past few weeks." Rebecca rested her hands together on the table. "I am glad to hear that, Margaret," she said gently, "because honestly, it might be the right time to make a change. The real estate market is very strong right now. Houses like this one sell quickly." Daniel looked slightly surprised by that comment, as if hearing it for the first time. Rebecca noticed his expression and quickly added, "I only mean that it could give Margaret more flexibility. Maybe a smaller place closer to town. Somewhere easier to manage." I watched her face carefully. Her confidence had grown even stronger than I expected. She truly believed everything was already settled. That belief gave her a boldness she might not otherwise have shown. I reached toward the small folder resting on the corner of the table beside me. Rebecca noticed the movement, but did not appear concerned. She probably assumed it contained something simple like property tax papers or maintenance receipts. Daniel glanced at the folder as well, but said nothing. I opened it slowly and removed several neatly arranged documents. The room remained quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. "You are right about something else, Rebecca," I said calmly as I placed the papers on the table. "The future of this house is an important decision. That is why I thought it would be helpful for all of us to look at a few things together tonight." Rebecca's smile remained in place, though it became slightly tighter at the corners. "What kind of things?" she asked. I slid the first document toward the center of the table so both of them could see it clearly. It was a printed copy of the property transfer filing from the county office. Daniel leaned forward slightly to read it. Rebecca's eyes moved quickly across the page, and for the first time that evening her confident expression flickered. I waited a moment before speaking again. "According to this document, I transferred ownership of this house several weeks ago." Daniel looked up in confusion. "What do you mean, Mom?" he asked. I pointed gently toward the signature at the bottom of the page. "That signature is supposed to be mine." Daniel studied the page again, clearly trying to understand what he was seeing. Rebecca sat very still, her hands folded tightly in front of her. "But there is a problem," I continued calmly. "I never signed this document." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything spoken earlier that evening. Daniel looked back and forth between us, trying to process the meaning of my words. Rebecca opened her mouth as if to speak, but paused when she noticed the second document I had already begun sliding across the table. This one contained the professional handwriting analysis Michael had arranged. The report described in careful detail the differences between my authentic signature and the one appearing on the transfer paperwork. I watched Rebecca's expression closely as she read the first few lines. The confidence she carried into this dinner was beginning to fade. Daniel leaned closer to the table again, his face tightening with confusion. "Mom," he said slowly, "are you saying someone forged your name?" I folded my hands gently in front of me and looked directly at Rebecca before answering. "Yes, Daniel," I said quietly. "That is exactly what I am saying." Daniel stared at the documents spread across the table as if they had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed unusually loud in the silence that followed. Rebecca did not speak at first. She simply looked down at the papers with an expression that had lost the calm confidence she carried into the room earlier that evening. Daniel picked up the first page slowly and read the lines again. "Mom, this says the house was transferred 3 weeks ago," he said carefully. His voice sounded uncertain, like someone trying to understand a puzzle that had too many missing pieces. I nodded gently. "That is what the filing claims," I replied. but I never signed those documents. Daniel shifted his attention to the second report, the handwriting analysis Michael had arranged. The explanation was clear and detailed, describing the subtle differences between my authentic signature and the one used on the transfer form. I watched his eyes move slowly across the page. When he finished reading, he looked up again, his expression no longer confused but deeply troubled. Rebecca remained very still. Her hands were clasped tightly together in front of her, and she had not touched the papers since I placed them on the table. For several seconds no one spoke. Finally Daniel turned toward his wife. "Rebecca, do you know anything about this?" he asked quietly. His voice was not angry. It was simply searching for an answer that made sense. Rebecca hesitated before responding. "That must be some kind of mistake," she said softly. Her voice sounded controlled, but there was a careful distance in the way she spoke. "Mistake," Daniel repeated. "What kind of mistake?" I allowed the conversation to unfold naturally without interrupting. Rebecca glanced toward me briefly before returning her attention to Daniel. "I do not know," she said. "Maybe the paperwork was filed incorrectly. Sometimes things get mixed up at those offices." Her explanation floated into the room without much weight behind it. Daniel looked down at the documents again. "But it lists you as the person who submitted the transfer request," he said slowly. Rebecca did not respond immediately. The quiet stretch of time that followed seemed to grow heavier with every second. I folded my hands calmly in front of me and spoke in the same steady tone I had used all evening. "The paperwork was notarized as well," I added gently. "According to the record, someone witnessed the signature being placed on the page." Daniel's eyes moved toward Rebecca again. "Did you take Mom to sign these papers?" he asked. Rebecca shook her head quickly. "Of course not," she replied. "I would never do something like that." I watched her expression carefully. The confidence that had guided her earlier suggestions about selling the house was gone now, replaced by something much more uncertain. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, clearly trying to piece together the situation. "If Mom did not sign it, and you did not take her to sign it, then how did this even happen?" he asked. I reached into the folder again and removed one final document. This page contained the information Michael had gathered about the notary office where the paperwork was verified. The name of the employee who processed the document appeared at the top of the report. I placed the paper gently beside the others. "The attorney handling this situation has already contacted the office listed here," I said calmly. "They are reviewing their records as well." Rebecca's eyes moved quickly to the page and then back to me. Her silence spoke louder than anything she might have said. Daniel looked at the papers once more before resting his hands on the table. "Mom, why did you wait until tonight to show us this?" he asked quietly. I gave a small thoughtful nod. "Because sometimes the truth becomes clearer when people believe they have already succeeded," I answered. Rebecca looked down again, and for the first time since the conversation began, she did not attempt to defend the situation or explain it away. The quiet confidence she carried into the room had slowly dissolved into silence. Daniel remained seated beside her, staring at the documents that described a plan he clearly had never known about. I looked around the dining room once more, at the familiar walls and the photographs that had been part of this house for so many years. Thomas used to say that time reveals the truth of people more clearly than anything else. As the three of us sat at that table, the truth had finally stepped into the room where it could no longer be ignored.